When we think of World War II, we usually remember a few familiar countries: Germany, Britain, the United States, Japan, the Soviet Union. But the truth is far bigger. More than 60 nations took part in World War II. Over 100 million soldiers were mobilized. People from every continent fought, worked, or died in the conflict. It was not just a European war or a Pacific war. It was a global struggle that reached nearly every corner of the world. So who really fought in World War II? And how did so many nations become part of one single war? To understand that, we must begin with the alliances that divided the world. Germany, Italy, and Japan formed the core of the Axis powers. These countries shared ambitions for expansion and influence, and together they challenged the existing world order. But they were not alone. Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Slovakia, and Croatia all fought alongside Germany at different times. Romania supplied oil from its fields at Ploiești. Hungary sent troops to the Eastern Front. Finland fought the Soviet Union in what it called the Continuation War, cooperating with Germany in hopes of reclaiming lost territory. Even small nations found themselves tied to a vast war machine. On the other side stood the Allies. Britain and France declared war on Germany in 1939. China had already been fighting Japan since 1937. In 1941, after Germany invaded the Soviet Union and Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, the Soviet Union and the United States joined the Allied side. But behind these famous nations stood dozens more. When Britain went to war, the British Empire went with it. Soldiers came from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, India, South Africa, and many African and Caribbean colonies. More than 2.5 million Indian soldiers served during the war, the largest volunteer army in history. Canadian troops fought in Europe and the Atlantic. Australian and New Zealand forces fought in North Africa, Greece, and the Pacific. France also drew on its empire. Troops from Morocco, Algeria, Senegal, and other African territories fought in Italy and France. Many who helped liberate Europe were not European at all. They were soldiers from colonies whose stories are often forgotten. The Soviet Union mobilized millions of men and women in what became the largest land war in history. American factories produced ships, tanks, and aircraft in enormous numbers, while American soldiers fought in North Africa, Italy, France, Germany, and across the Pacific. In Latin America, Brazil sent more than 25,000 troops to fight in Italy. Mexico's 201st Fighter Squadron flew combat missions in the Pacific. Other nations protected shipping routes, supplied materials, or hosted military bases. The war spread far beyond Europe. In Asia, China had already been fighting Japan for years before 1939. Chinese resistance tied down hundreds of thousands of Japanese troops. Across Southeast Asia, countries like Burma, the Philippines, Malaya, Indonesia, and Vietnam were drawn into the conflict through invasion and occupation. Thailand cooperated with Japan. Resistance movements formed in occupied countries. Island by island, battle by battle, the Pacific became one of the largest battlefields in history. World War II was truly a world war. Some countries changed sides during the conflict. Italy began the war as Germany's ally, but after Mussolini fell in 1943, Italy joined the Allies. Romania and Bulgaria also switched sides late in the war. Finland eventually fought against German troops in its territory. These complicated alliances remind us that nations often acted out of survival, fear, or political pressure. Not every country fought openly. Some were occupied but never surrendered. Poland fought from the first day of the war until the last, even after its government was forced into exile. French resistance fighters sabotaged railways and helped prepare for D-Day. Yugoslav partisans tied down entire German divisions. Norwegian resistance fighters destroyed heavy water plants that could have helped Nazi nuclear research. Many of these fighters never wore uniforms, but they were soldiers of the war. Some nations tried to remain neutral. Sweden, Switzerland, Spain, Portugal, and Turkey stayed out of direct fighting. Yet even neutrality was complicated. Sweden traded iron ore. Spain sent volunteers to fight in Russia. Switzerland sheltered refugees and prisoners of war. Neutral countries were still shaped by the conflict. In a war of such scale, no nation was untouched. So who really fought in World War II? It was not just famous generals and major powers. It was Canadian sailors guarding Atlantic convoys, Indian soldiers fighting in the deserts of North Africa, Brazilian troops climbing the mountains of Italy, Chinese soldiers defending their cities, Polish pilots flying in the Battle of Britain, African troops liberating French towns, resistance fighters risking their lives in secret. World War II was fought by millions of people whose names are rarely remembered. By the time the war ended in 1945, more than 70 million people had died. Entire cities were destroyed, empires collapsed, new nations were born. The war reshaped borders, governments, and societies across the world. Understanding who fought reminds us that World War II was not just the story of a few powerful countries. It was a shared global tragedy carried by soldiers and civilians from nearly every nation on Earth. And their sacrifices changed history forever.